Well, good morning, and thank you all for being here today. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to discuss one of the greatest responsibilities that any representative has, and why, once elected, I will fight for greater accountability in the United States House of Representatives. But first, I want to thank Senator Durbin for being here with us today. He's a true voice for compassion and courage in the Senate. On the great issues of our time, he has spoken out eloquently and effectively for the principles of the United States and our country, and our state are fortunate to have him as a leader. As a Democrat, I believe our party is better for having him in it, and I'm thankful for your support.
Good job.
Now, our Constitution places a great deal of responsibility in the hands of our citizen legislators. These men and women we elect to the House and Senate have the awesome duty of overseeing the executive branch and calling it to account when it fails the American people. Congress is supposed to be the brake on the executive to ensure that one man cannot trample on the rights and the ideals of the nation. The Founding Fathers did not intend to give Congress a pass when the same political party has power in both the legislative and executive branches. Indeed, I believe that the obligation to hold power to account is even greater when that power is concentrated in one political party. Sadly, the current Republican leadership has abdicated this solemn obligation. They have ceased to be accountable to the people, and they have refused to hold the Bush administration accountable for its continued failure to make us safe both at home and abroad. The two most obvious and tragic examples of these failures are Iraq and the current Page scandal. My opponent has refused to hold this administration accountable for their repeated missteps on Iraq. They failed to send in adequate numbers of troops. They failed to share the burden with our allies. And they failed to give honest assessments about the progress of the war to the American people. These failures demanded action from Congress, but Mr. Weller and his fellow Republican leaders have refused to hold this administration accountable. I believe that this is the single greatest reason why Mr. Weller deserves to lose his job in November. He has joined the lemming herd behind the president as he marches our military over the cliff. He has avoided all attempts to hold himself accountable, refusing to answer questions and refusing to visit our troops before they leave for Iraq or visit them once there. His lack of leadership on this issue will not be forgotten this November. Because I believe that our leaders are accountable to the people, I can and will pledge action on this issue. Once elected, I will go to Iraq. I will talk with the troops and commanders on the ground and gain a better understanding of the enemy we face. I will work with other representatives in Washington to hold hearings into the conduct of this war so that the American people can know how their dollars are being spent and whether the troops are getting the assistance that they need. And I will demand answers from this administration on our progress in Iraq, and if they fail to provide those answers, I will join the fight for a change in policy. But the lack of leadership and accountability in Washington does not, unfortunately, end there. Yesterday, the Associated Press reported further allegations of improper conduct towards teenage pages have been raised before the congressional panel that oversees the Page program. Now, we do not know whether the allegations concern representatives or their staffs, but we do know of the Republican approach to this scandal, and it warrants a great deal of concern. It has become abundantly clear that members of the House leadership knew of Mr. Foley's behavior long before it became public, and they chose not to remove him as a threat to the minors in the Page program. My opponent, Mr. Weller, claims that he had no knowledge of Mr. Foley's misconduct, and we must believe him in the absence of evidence to the contrary. But members of the leadership did know, including Speaker Hastert and Representative Shimkus. As we now know, they chose not to act, preferring to hold on to a reliably Republican seat rather than protecting the minors in their care. Rather than hold one of their own accountable, they put children at risk. As a father of a young son, I find their actions reprehensible. Political power is meaningless if it is not used to protect the most vulnerable, and the safety of children must always come before partisan political concerns. Until today, I have chosen not to speak publicly about this issue. Instead, I prefer to discuss my plan for Iraq and Mr. Weller's refusal to hold the administration accountable for a failed policy that has now cost almost 70 American lives this month alone. But both of these issues come back to the fact that there is a serious lack of accountability in Washington, D.C. today. Even when Mr. Weller blamed Democrats for this scandal, even when without proof, he attacked Democrats, suggesting that my party withheld information that could have protected the Pages. Even then, we did not talk about this issue. But in light of the revelations from the AP article, I will not remain silent. I cannot risk Mr. Weller claiming high ground to which I believe his party is not entitled, because this is a desperate attempt to deflect attention from the Republican Party's record of failure and lack of accountability. Instead, I issue today an appeal for greater accountability in cleansing the House of this stain. In light of these revelations, I demand that the House Page Board deal harshly with any representatives or staff members who may have engaged in inappropriate behavior. If such behavior is discovered, the guilty party must resign and his position immediately. If such behavior is revealed and further cover-ups are uncovered, anyone in the Republican leadership who engaged in such actions must resign their leadership roles. I call upon Mr. Weller today to join me in this demand, and I call upon him to use his leadership position to call for reform of the program, rather than using his megaphone to level unwarranted attacks at the Democratic Party. It is my hope that he will do so, but I fear that Mr. Weller's record leaves little room for optimism that he will finally hold his party accountable for their failures. Mr. Weller all too often attempts to ignore the problems before him. He ignores Iraq. He votes against allowing the Justice Department to investigate price gouging when oil companies are making outlandish profits, an issue that needs serious accountability. And now when children were and still may be in danger, he chooses to not take the principled stand. Indeed, one of his spokesmen said accountability on Iraq means nothing. But I believe that when a failed policy is causing us to lose our bravest patriots, the least we can do is to demand greater accountability. And it is worth noting that yesterday in Kankakee, when I stood with Mr. Durbin, the death count for this month was 60. It has now gone up by 11. Accountability is the greatest duty any representative has. It is the duty of the legislative branch to provide a check on the executive's power. Mr. Weller and the Republican leadership have turned their back on that duty and on the American people. I will fight for accountability once elected, because I know that if I do not, I too will be held accountable. Thank you again for being here. Thank you, Senator, for being here. Your courage on these issues reminds all of us what leadership really is about.
Thanks very much, John. And I